A lot of videos have been posted to YouTube recently about the idea that the Earth is flat, usually showing a diagram like this one. Notice that it looks a lot like a great circle map centered on the North Pole. That's because it was based on it. Many flat earthers make a big deal about the similarity to the UN logo, saying that that's because the UN knows that that is what the Earth really looks like. Of course, the real reason is because they were both based on the North Pole Great Circle map. Instead of cherry-picking a bunch of multi-flight routes which have more to do with undersold flights and with the shape of the Earth, I'm going to look at direct flights that actually exist. I'm also not going to illustrate the global perspective with a Mercator projection. A fourth grader knows better than that. Instead, I will use great circle maps centered on the origin point, which curve the map instead of curving the route. Let's start with Santiago, also known as Santiago de Chile. A flight from Santiago to Sydney takes 14 hours 15 minutes. A flight to Dallas takes 10 hours 10 minutes. A flight to New York City takes 10 hours 40 minutes, and a flight to Paris takes 13 hours 45 minutes. Now, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by suggesting that the diagram on the right shows the actual paths these flights will take. That depends on a lot of factors, including flight restrictions and even weather. However, considering these two diagrams, the flat Earth perspective as shown by the flat Earth map on the left, and the globalist perspective as shown by the Great Circle map centered on Santiago on the right, which do you think best explains the relative flight times? Well, I think the answer to that seems pretty obvious. Moving on to Sydney, we find that a flight from Sydney to Santiago takes 12 hours 40 minutes. A flight to Dallas takes 15 hours 35 minutes, and a flight to Johannesburg, South Africa, takes 14 hours 20 minutes. Very interesting. You'll notice that the Great Circle map centered on Sydney looks quite different from the one centered on Santiago. Now let's move on to Buenos Aires. A flight to Auckland takes 13 hours 35 minutes, and yes, that's in New Zealand. A flight to Dallas takes 10 hours 55 minutes. A flight to Cayo Coco in Cuba takes 8 hours 45 minutes, and a flight to London takes 13 hours 20 minutes. Now moving on to Johannesburg. A flight to Sydney takes 11 hours 50 minutes. A flight to Paris takes 10 hours 50 minutes. A flight to New York City takes 15 hours 45 minutes. And a flight to Sao Paulo takes 10 hours 20 minutes. A lot of people have made a big deal out of the fact that you cannot get a flight from Santiago to Johannesburg or anywhere else in South Africa. While this is true, the fact is you can get a flight from Sao Paulo, Brazil to Johannesburg. And the reason for that is simple. Sao Paulo is the hub for people who live in South America who want to fly to South Africa. If there were enough people willing to buy a ticket to fly from, say, Santiago to Cape Town, then such a flight would exist. Well, there aren't enough people willing to buy those tickets, so the flight does not exist. It's as simple as that. I'm sure you probably noticed that among these flights, there are two flights in particular that stand out. First of all, the flight from Santiago to Sydney, and then the flight from Buenos Aires to Auckland. According to the flat earthers, the disk of the flat earth as represented in this diagram is 25 to 28,000 miles across. According to that, both of these flights should be anywhere from 18,000 to 20,000 miles long. Well, I don't think I need to tell you that that is far beyond the range of any commercial jetliner. So how can such non-stop flights exist? How do the flat earthers explain these flights? Well, it's quite simple. They don't exist. What? You're saying that the flat earthers say these flights don't exist? Yes, the flat earthers claim that these flights don't exist. But they don't stop there. They also say that satellites don't exist, that the International Space Station doesn't exist, that moon landing never happened, that's all fake, you know, and they even claim that gravity doesn't exist. You see, they sidestep the question of why the flat Earth wouldn't have pulled itself into a ball under the influence of gravity by saying that gravity just doesn't exist. But wait, if gravity doesn't exist, what makes us fall? That's a good question. You see, flat earthers believe that the Earth is accelerating upward, and it's been doing this at a constant rate of 1g for thousands, millions, even billions of years. How can it do that without exceeding the speed of light? And what is causing it to move upward? Putting this all together, you begin to get an appreciation for just how much science you have to throw out the window in order to believe in the flat Earth fairy tale. And yes, it is just that, a fairy tale.